The old house on the outskirts of town had always been a place of whispered stories, a relic from a time long past. Its peeling white paint, the cracked windows, and the overgrown ivy that crept up its sides made it appear abandoned, yet the door was always locked, as though someone or something was still inside. Most people avoided it, but for three friends, the lure of mystery was too strong to ignore. Ryan, Sarah, and Mark had been friends since childhood, and though they were now in their 20s, they still sought out the same thrills they did when they were younger. Ghost stories, haunted places, and daredevil challenges were their weekend activities. So when Ryan found a faded newspaper clipping about the house, mentioning strange disappearances and unsettling sounds heard late at night, they couldn't resist. They would spend the night there, capture some footage, and call it a victory over superstition. The house was even more imposing as they approached, its silhouette black against the pale orange of the setting sun. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the trees around them as they stood before the rusted iron gate. The place had an unsettling stillness, as though the air itself was holding its breath. Mark gave the gate a tentative push. The screeching sound echoed across the empty yard, and Sarah winced. "This is crazy," she muttered. But Ryan, always the boldest, smiled. "It's just an old house. What's the worst that could happen?" They moved up the cracked stone path, the grass crunching under their shoes, and reached the front door. It was unlocked. Without a word, Ryan pushed it open. The door creaked, protesting against the intrusion, revealing the dark interior. The smell of mildew and something faintly rotten filled the air. They stood in the entryway, their flashlights dancing across the dusty furniture and cobwebbed corners. The silence was heavy, as if the house had been waiting for them. "Let's set up in the living room," Ryan suggested, moving toward a large, dimly lit room to the left. Inside, the furniture was old, but still intact. An ornate mirror hung above the mantelpiece, its surface cracked, but not shattered. The walls were covered with peeling wallpaper in shades of faded rose, their patterns almost unrecognizable under the dirt and grime of time. It felt wrong, the kind of wrong that crawls under your skin without you fully realizing it. They set up their equipment, the cameras pointed in various directions around the room. As they sat down to wait for nightfall, the sounds of the house creaked and groaned. A settling, perhaps, or something else. Sarah glanced around nervously. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Mark, who had been fiddling with the equipment, stopped and listened. The house was completely still now, save for the occasional rustle of leaves outside. "I didn't hear anything," but Sarah had. A soft thump, like footsteps from somewhere far away, echoed faintly through the floorboards. It was distant, almost inaudible, but the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She leaned forward. "I swear I heard something." Ryan dismissed it with a shrug. "It's just the house settling. Relax." But Sarah couldn't relax. The unease in her gut only grew stronger as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room. The temperature seemed to drop, and Sarah noticed the faintest trace of cold breath hanging in the air in front of her. She rubbed her arms, trying to shake off the chill. The air became thicker, heavier, as if the room itself was alive, watching them. Then the noises started. Faint creaks from the second floor, the whisper of something dragging across the floor, something barely audible, but undeniably there. Mark shifted uneasily in his seat, glancing at Sarah. "This is getting weird," he muttered. Ryan, ever the skeptic, scoffed. It's just the wind. Or maybe an animal in the walls. We're fine. But then the flashlight on the table flickered and died. The room plunged into darkness. What the... Ryan's voice cut through the stillness. But before he could finish, a sound echoed from above. A slow, dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. They all froze. It was louder now, closer. As it neared the stairs, the floorboards creaked under the weight of something. Someone? A muffled whisper followed, low and unintelligible, but Sarah could feel the words as much as hear them. A sudden burst of cold air swept through the room, and the temperature dropped even further. A shadow moved at the top of the stairs, its shape too human to be anything other than a person. But when Ryan called out, the shadow didn't respond. It just stood there, watching. Mark stood, his voice shaking. We need to go. Now. But Sarah couldn't move. Something in her chest held her in place, her body refusing to obey her mind. Then, without warning, the figure at the top of the stairs moved. Slowly, deliberately, its steps heavy and dragging. Suddenly, the silence shattered with a loud crash from upstairs. The sound of someone, falling. It echoed through the house like the final, breaking note of a terrible symphony. The air pulsed with a malevolent force that seemed to choke the very life from the room. Ryan scrambled to his feet, panic overtaking his usual bravado. We need to leave now. They bolted for the door, but as they reached the threshold, it slammed shut with a force that made the entire house shake. A sharp, guttural sound, like nails scraping on wood, came from behind them. They turned, hearts racing, but there was nothing there, just the shadows, shifting in the corners of the room. And then, in the reflection of the mirror, they saw it, a figure, standing right behind them. But when they turned around, the room was empty. The door to the house opened just as easily as it had closed. They ran, and they didn't stop until they were miles away. As they sat in Ryan's car, panting, hearts still racing, Sarah looked at the others. Did we all see the same thing? Mark nodded, his face pale. I don't know what it was, but it wanted us to leave. Ryan, gripping the wheel, didn't speak. He didn't have to. None of them did. They never spoke of it again. But every year, without fail, Sarah would find the house on the outskirts of town, still standing, still waiting, and sometimes, just as she passed by, she'd swear she saw a figure in the window, watching her with hollow eyes.